Hey there, Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. If you have a cup of coffee or a cold one, you might as well get it, sit down, because we're going to be here for a few minutes. I'm going to talk about something I've never talked about before, and I've been inspired to do it today. The subject is heating your shop. And what inspired me to do it, and I don't know why I didn't think of it before, quite honestly, it's a great subject. Samcraft, who is one of the channels that I'm subscribed to, Sam talked about his shop and how he has evolved through a couple different iterations of type of fuel heat that he used in his shop. And he talked about the pros and cons of it. And I thought that was really pretty good. Well, I will tell you, I've used 6 different types of heating sources in a workshop over my lifetime. So I thought I'd talk about those 6 real quick since I have used them. I know the pros and cons of them. Not everybody's workshop is the same. And I know that what some of these things I talk about would never work in your shop or be practical. But you may get an idea from something too. So if you get a chance, you should go watch Sam's video. I'll leave a link to it in the description because he has some pretty good insight on it too. And so, but I'll talk about the different things and how they're different and why, and the advantages and disadvantages of both. First off, let's talk about the Salamand type heater to begin with, because even though I have used them, you can't use them in a workshop. It just doesn't work. They put out too much fumes, and it probably will kill you if you keep it in a closed area and try to use it for any length of time. So don't even think about using a salamander type, whether it's a propane or a diesel. Neither one. Don't use it in the shop because you can't use those in a closed area. There is another source that I'm not going to use because I've never really used it, and that's oil burning, where you have a drip rate of some kind of used oil or something that you do. I don't know much about those, but that's the only other one I can think of. Of the 6 that I've used, they are electric, natural gas, propane, kerosene, wood, and coal. And I'll tell you a story about the wood and coal because it's kind of an interesting story what I did there. But those are the 6 types. Now, the 6 different classifications that I used. Now, I will kind of break it down into 2 classes on those. The one that I call auto run, and those that are they're refillable. You have to step in and maintain it in some way to keep the flow of the heat. So, and a good example is like what I use now is an overhead natural gas furnace, and it runs off of the electric grid and the gas grid, and so that's what supplies it, and it runs for as long as I want it to run. I don't have to do anything. I don't touch it. I set the thermostat and I leave it alone. Which is another subject we should talk about in heating a shop. But that is one type, is one where you don't have to do anything. And then there's all the other types where you have to intervene. A wood stove, coal burning, kerosene, propane. Those all, you have to supply it and get the supply there. Now, the amount of work you have to do to keep it maintained can vary on each of these, with wood being one of the worst. If you want to maintain a wood supply and heat with wood, that's where you're going to put in the most amount of work, in my opinion. And I mean a lot more than most of the others. Coal is probably, believe it or not, I would consider it the least evasive on my time of all of these different ones. It's the easiest to get it. When I used it, I would go to the coal mines and have them load right up in the back of my pickup. I'd bring it home and shovel it off into a bin right in my shop. And then I fed off of that all winter long from my furnace, and it lasted all winter. So it was only one time that I had to get the coal and then put it all into the bin, and I was done with that part of it. From there, it was just a matter of one shovel at a time, right there at the spot where I'm doing the heating. So yes, it takes work, but it's the least evasive amount of time it takes that you have to keep putting into it, as far as I'm concerned, and get the best amount of heat out of. And dollar for dollar, nothing comes close for the convenience of it and the cost, because It cost me about $30 a winter to heat with coal in that big shop I had. When I did it with propane, it ran me right around $1,600 a month in my highest month. So it is a very inexpensive way to heat, but it is a certain amount of work. So propane is a great way to go, but you got to make sure that you use a flue type system so that the gases that you burn from the propane is exhaust to a chimney of some kind. Don't use if you use a flueless type where the air just burns, like maybe the small portable propane ones that like the little buddy heater and that sort of thing. The problem with those is there's a lot of humidity that is emitted, because one of the byproducts of burning propane is water and natural gas too. So if you have a natural gas furnace that's flueless, and I've used one of those too, the humidity you get in your shop would be horrible. So if you go to one that the burning is inside your shop and it's propane or natural gas, you're going to be fighting humidity in there. So you want to keep that in mind if that's what you're going to go to. Or if you decide you want to try a different alternative type, that's kind of what you want to watch out for when you use those. They're usually easy for hooking up, and maintaining isn't too bad for the propane. You can fill the 20-pound bottles or whatever. Go out and swap them out now and then. They can be time consuming, but and it's kind of expensive. Propane is actually pretty costly to heat an area with propane, no matter how efficient you are. So propane works, but it would not be anywhere near the top. That is what I would use if I didn't really have much choice. If I was in an off-grid situation, I wanted to get a comfortable heat, I would probably go with propane if I couldn't find a good source of coal off-grid. Again, you could do wood if you had lots of wood, but be prepared to do a lot of work. That's all. But propane is probably, for being one of the least evasive, you just keep the tank filled. That's all you got to do, is keep the supply started to going in. And every now and then, if you have to go buy more fuel, or if you put it in a large container and they come out with a big truck and fill you up on a big tank, that isn't so bad. But it is very expensive to go propane. So, but it does a good job. It will heat a shop as long as you make sure that the gas is taken out of the shop and not stay in the shop. So make sure you use one that has a chimney built into the propane furnace. So anyway, and I think that's it. Kerosene. Now I used kerosene for a long time in my shop, and I actually liked it a lot. It has a lot of advantages, and when I first started using it, kerosene was only probably 50 cents a gallon, and gasoline was around $1.75 in that same time period. Give you an idea, it was very inexpensive, and I could heat my shop, and it cost me maybe $40 or $30 a month to heat my 2-car garage with a kerosene heater, even if I heated it all night long. Because sometimes, and I know you're going to cringe here, but yes, I did leave it on all night long out in the shop. But I was always careful about where it was, how it was set up. So if something, even, and you hear about them, all of a sudden something going wrong with them, I never had a problem. I always kept everything away from it when it wasn't attended by me, and I would check on it because it was right there in my own garage. So I could check on it at any time, even if I left for a few hours. So I used that, and that really worked very well. It was very inexpensive until kerosene shot up one year finally, and it went from like 50 cents a gallon to $2.5, $3 a gallon, then to $4 a gallon, and now it's a ridiculous price for kerosene. So, and it's hard to find anymore too, kerosene. So I finally gave up on my kerosene heaters. I think that is a great alternative, though, for an emergency. If you have your power go out and you're going to have to heat your house for a few days, honestly, if you could get a hold of kerosene, and have to go get it because there is no power in your area for a while, kerosene is a good alternative to heat at a reasonable price, and you can run 5 gallons of kerosene. It'll last you quite a long time. It'll last you 2 days, 3 days, if I remember correctly. So yeah, you're going to be getting kerosene all the time, but I don't think it'd be a lot less than what I think you would spend on a generator if you were running the generator 24 hours a day and trying to keep that filled up with gasoline. Kerosene is not a bad alternative, and it's great for emergency use if you have no choice. You have to heat it somehow. And if you have kerosene heaters, those things are actually very good for that. You do have a problem with smell, but the only time those things usually smell is when you first start it and when you shut it off. So what I would do when I used it in the house on those kind of dishes where there was no power for a couple of days, what I ended up doing was I would start it outside, let it run for 10 minutes, and you could tell when it's going full bore in the nice clean flame and the light that you're getting from it, you know that it's now running full bore and fully heated. Then I would pick it up and carefully bring it in and set it in the house, and I ran it. When I shut it off, I would take it and shut it down, and within 5 seconds of when I shut that down, I would take it outside because that would also smell. And sometimes it's better if I just took it out, then shut it down, because, boy, I'll tell you what, that thing will sting too when you shut it off. So those are the only two big disadvantages to the kerosene. Now, of course, you got to be careful because it's a hot surface. But a byproduct of the kerosene heater is you can actually heat things on there too and cook things on the top of it. So it's kind of convenient for if you want a nice little stove inside your shop. It's a nice way to have a little stove in the wintertime too. So I like the kerosene heater. And like I said, if I had a good source on kerosene that was easy to get to, that would be my go-to in an emergency if we lost power for heating. So anyway, that's a thought about kerosene. As far as my wood and stove and coal, I have to tell you the story about that real quick. So, yeah, real quick. Anyway, when I was in my 20s, in the 1970s, I had an auto repair shop, and I wanted to heat it. Now, a repair shop has to be a lot bigger than like a wood shop, because you're pulling cars in, and when I did it for a living, I'd have to have a place for 2, 3, 4 cars inside. So you're talking about 2,000 square feet type of thing, or more. I can't remember what it was. I think at the biggest it got to be around 4,000 square feet. The way I heated that, first winter, you couldn't get natural gas. In those days, natural gas couldn't be allowed on new builds. You couldn't hook up to the natural gas because there was a shortage. You had to go propane or full electric. Well, in my shop, I went with the propane, and my first winter cost me like $800 a month through the worst months for the propane. It was financially devastating to me at that time. So the next year, I decided I had to do something different. So what I did is I got one of those old fuel tanks, the 275-gallon fuel tank. They're kind of round or oval-shaped. They used to be up on metal frame legs, and they sat behind a lot of mobile homes. They used them for feeding the fuel oil into the furnace for mobile homes in mobile home parks. And they were used in farms and places like that. But it was a great little 275-gallon tank, steel tank. And we took it and set it up on end, put 4 legs on it to lift it up off the ground about 12 inches. And then I put 2 holes in the front, one at about halfway up and one near the bottom. And I put cast iron doors on there for air and access. The lower end was used for the ashes. I put a plate in between the two, just below the top door opening. And I left an opening in the very center that was only like a 12 by 12 area, very small. And then what I would do is any air coming in through the bottom door would have to come up through that area like a chimney. And boy, it burned really well. And that whole barrel would get nice and warm. And I had the stack coming out of that and going up. From there, I had 10-foot ceilings in this room that this thing was used in, and a big, huge fan that the standing fan I had behind it to blow air across it and blow it into the rest of the shop. And they kept that whole place 75 degrees all the time. When I opened up the overhead door and pulled the car in and took it out, it recovered very nicely. The first year though, the problem was that I was using wood, and wood did a great job, but boy, does it take a lot of wood to do that. And so I thought the next year that can't work, because it just was a lot of work to keep up with trying to burn wood in there. So that's when I came up with the idea, and I don't remember who told me to start trying to burn coal. So the next winter, I bought a truckload of coal. There was a coal mine 20 miles away, and I drove there, had loaded up the back of my truck with what it would hold, brought it home, put it in a bin underneath near where the stove was, so I could just take a shovel at a time and put it in the stove. And I did that for 4 years or 5 years till I sold off that whole place and moved out. I used that heater from that day forward. It cost me $30 all winter long to heat that building inside. People would come by and see that thing going, and then, boy, it would be nice and toasty warm in that shop. And the furnace would be roaring with the fan behind it blowing, and they were just amazed at how well it worked. And it did. It worked very well. So if I was going to do a wood stove or a coal-burning stove in my shop, I would say that would be fine. Dedicate your area carefully and plan it. Make sure you give enough room for the supplies that you're going to need, because especially with coal, you wouldn't need so much. Probably 3 55-gallon drums, I'll bet, would last all winter in a small stove. But you do have to have it ready to go, and you have to learn to burn that stuff, because you'll clog your chimney a few times, and boy, is that a mess to clean that out when it's all filled with soot to where it doesn't breathe, and what a mess you'll have. I can remember doing that a few times till I learned to burn it properly. But once you learn to burn coal, man, you can really get a nice thing going and keep it going for a long time. Pretty cheap. So, but I would build some kind of furnace myself. I don't think I would ever buy something that's already out there. I think you could probably build something and get a better design out of it than you could of what you buy out there. I've seen some of them, and they're not very practical, and they're not very good for the air. They don't understand the airflow around fire, apparently, and how to really get it. The way I had it was more almost like a forge. And so with the way the air came in, but there was no fan needed. The draft alone was enough to pull that air up through that thing, and boy, it just kept going. And it burned very well that way. And you look at these designs, they're not very good in my mind. So anyway, that's an engineering thing. I'm not qualified to be engineered. So as far as those are the types I use, that's kind of the what I kind of seen with each of them, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. The only other thing I'm going to talk about here real quick is the strategy of when you want to run your heat. Do you want to run it 24 hours a day, or is it better to just fire it up in the morning when you come out there in the cold and then let it go out at night when you leave? That type of thing. I actually am of the school that I like to leave my furnace running. I keep my shop warm all the time. Even when I used wood and coal and I did it with kerosene, I always try to keep it running all the time to maintain the heat. One thing I have to say about in a shop that you let cool down real cold and then heat it up the next day, you're always fighting the cold all day long still, because all the tools and all the fixtures in there, everything is starting off stone cold. And it takes a long time to really bring up the ambient temperature in all these items inside the shop. It takes more than just the air being warm. But if you keep everything nice and warm at a constant temperature, it's much easier to maintain it. So, I am a firm believer in keeping and maintaining the heat in the shop all 24 hours a day if you can. But that's only if you're going out there all the time. I'm out here every day, so yeah, that's why I do it that way. If I came out here once a week, I probably would just turn it on, let it warm it up in here for a couple hours before I came out and live with that way. But as a general rule, if you're going to be there every day, you probably should try to figure out how to keep that heat going, maintaining, as opposed to starting and stopping it. just my thought on those items. I think that's everything I can think of how I want to talk about this. I want to thank Sam for his video. Make sure you go watch his. I did leave a link to it in the description, so go watch his too. And don't be afraid to give him a comment. He loves to talk to everybody. So if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, I'd love to hear it. Just leave them in the comments below. If you learned something here, or you like this video, hit that like button. Or if you like Ramblin' Russ, because that was what this was. So anyway, most importantly though, please come back again, because I'm nowhere near done. Thanks, and we'll see all you guys soon.